The skies above Lumora burned with a fierce, unrelenting glow, a mixture of crimson and gold that seemed almost alive in its fury. It was not the serene beauty of a sunset, but the cruel fire of destruction raining down from the heavens. The once vibrant colony, nestled within the shimmering crystalline forests of Orion 5, was now a place of despair and ruin. The air was thick with the acrid stench of smoke and scorched metal, and the distant cries of the wounded echoed like a mournful dirge through the chaos. High Administrator Kalen stood in the crumbling remains of the control tower, his four slender arms gripping the edge of a shattered console. His usually calm and commanding presence was now overshadowed by the tremble in his hands and the weight in his chest. Through the cracked observation window, he could see the devastation below. A city once alive with the hum of peaceful industry and the laughter of families now reduced to rubble and ash. The Drakari marauders had come like a plague, their dark ships blotting out the sun, casting an ominous shadow over Lumora. The Drakari vessels, jagged and menacing, hung in the sky like predators circling their prey. Their blackened hulls absorbed the light, making them appear as voids against the burning horizon. For days they had toyed with the Lumorans, their attacks calculated and merciless. Yesterday they had obliterated the water purification plant, leaving the colony to ration what little clean water remained. Today, they had destroyed the last orbital defense platform, ensuring that no help could come from beyond the stars. Kaelin's people, gentle miners, scholars, and farmers, were no match for the Drakari's cruelty. They were a race of peace, unarmed and unprepared for such horrors. Deep beneath the surface, hidden within the labyrinthine crystal caves, Elder Vera gathered the youngest and most vulnerable of the Lumorans. The caves, once a place of quiet meditation and spiritual reflection, now served as a fragile sanctuary. The walls of the caves glowed faintly, their crystalline structures pulsating with an ethereal light, as if they too mourned the suffering above. Elder Vera, her frail frame draped in the traditional silver robes of her station, stood in the center of the chamber. Her voice, though weathered by age, carried a strength born of decades of wisdom and faith. She sang the ancient songs of their ancestors, melodies that spoke of resilience, unity, and the enduring spirit of their people. The children, their wide, tear-filled eyes reflecting the soft glow of the crystals, huddled close, clinging to one another for comfort. But not all in the caves were content to wait and hope. Among the frightened crowd was Saria, a young Lumoran with eyes that burned with defiance. Her heart pounded with anger and determination, refusing to accept that their fate was sealed. While others prayed, she acted. Slipping away from the group, she crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnels that ran like veins beneath the colony. The air was thick and stale, the faint hum of failing machinery her only companion as she navigated the dimly lit passages. Her hands, trembling but resolute, worked quickly to reroute what little power remained from the dying life support systems to amplify the colony's distress beacon. Sweat dripped from her brow as she tightened the final connection. The faint hum of the beacon grew louder, its signal now strong enough to pierce the void of space. Saria leaned back against the cold metal wall, her chest heaving with exhaustion. Her voice, barely above a whisper, carried a desperate plea into the darkness. "Please, someone, anyone, hear us." Above, the Drakari continued their relentless assault, their weapons tearing through what little remained of Lumora's defenses. But deep within the caves, a single spark of hope had been ignited. Saria's whispered words, carried on the amplified waves of the distress beacon, reached out into the infinite expanse of the galaxy, a cry for salvation amidst the chaos. Far across the silent expanse of space, aboard the human warship Horizon's Wrath Asterisk, the hum of routine filled the air. The crew moved with practiced precision, their voices low as they exchanged reports and monitored the endless void beyond the ship's reinforced hull. Captain Elias Mercer sat in his quarters, his sharp eyes scanning through the mundane updates of cargo manifests and patrol logs. His weathered face, marked by years of command, betrayed no emotion, but the weight of responsibility was ever present in his steady posture. Suddenly, the calm was shattered. A sharp, desperate signal pierced through the static of the communication systems, like a cry for help echoing in the emptiness of the stars. It was faint, distorted, and alien, but the urgency was unmistakable. Mercer froze for a moment, his hand hovering over the console. The voice, though unfamiliar, carried a universal tone of desperation. He pressed a button, amplifying the transmission. The words became clearer. "Please, anyone hear us. Lumora is under attack. We won't survive much longer." Mercer's heart sank as he listened. The message was fragmented, but the meaning was clear. Lumora, a colony he had barely heard of, was on the brink of annihilation. He rose from his seat, his boots echoing against the metal floor as he strode onto the bridge. The crew turned to him, their faces tense, waiting for orders. Commander Elena Reyes, his first officer, was already at her station, her sharp eyes scanning the details of the incoming transmission. "It's the Drakari Marauders," she said, her voice low and grim. "Their fleet is in the sector. They've been raiding colonies for months. No survivors, no mercy." Her words hung heavy in the air, and the crew exchanged uneasy glances. The Drakari were more than just pirates. They were a force of destruction, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. Mercer's jaw tightened as he considered their options. The Horizon's Wrath was a formidable ship, but it was just one vessel. The Drakari fleet, if the reports were accurate, was vast and ruthless. This was no ordinary mission. "What's the nearest ETA to Lumora?" he asked, his voice steady but urgent. Reyes hesitated. "3 days at full speed, sir," she replied. But by then, she didn't need to finish. They all knew what 3 days meant. By then, Lumora would be nothing more than a memory. From the engineering bay, Chief Engineer Darius Cole's voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, there might be another way," he said, his tone cautious but determined. "The quantum leap drive, it's still in the testing phase, but if it works, we could cut the journey to a few hours." The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew about the prototype drive, a piece of experimental technology designed to bend the fabric of space itself. It had been tested in simulations, but never in a real-world scenario. The risks were enormous. If it failed, they could end up stranded in the void, or worse, torn apart by the forces of their own ambition. Mercer's gaze turned to the stars beyond the viewport, his mind racing. He could almost hear the cries of the Lumorans, their voices carried on the faint signal that had reached them against all odds. He thought of the 20,000 lives hanging in the balance, of the children hiding in caves, of the desperation in the voice that had begged for help. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a physical force. Cole's voice broke the silence again. "Captain, I won't lie, this could go horribly wrong, but if we do nothing, those people are as good as dead." Mercer turned to face his crew, his expression hardening with resolve. "Prepare the drive," he said firmly. "We're not just a warship, we're a promise to stand against the darkness no matter the cost. Let's show the galaxy what humanity stands for." The crew sprang into action, their hesitation replaced by a shared determination. The hum of the ship's engines grew into a roar as the quantum leap drive powered up, the air vibrating with the raw energy of the untested technology. Mercer stood at the center of the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the infinite blackness ahead. He knew the risks, but he also knew the price of inaction. As the ship prepared to leap into the unknown, Mercer addressed his crew one last time. "Hold your ground, trust in each other, and remember, this isn't just about Lumora. It's about proving that no matter how far the darkness spreads, there will always be someone willing to fight back. Let's bring them hope." The engines roared louder, the ship trembling as if it, too, understood the magnitude of what was about to happen. And then, in a flash of light, the Horizon's Wrath disappeared into the void, carrying with it the hopes of an entire colony and the unyielding resolve of humanity. The horizon's wrath tore into the Orion system, emerging from hyperspace like a predator stalking its prey. The void around them was eerily silent, but the scene before their eyes was anything but calm. The once vibrant colony of Lumora, nestled on the surface of the planet below, was now a smoldering ruin. Great plumes of fire and smoke rose into the atmosphere, their orange and black tendrils twisting like the grasping fingers of a dying world. Above the planet, the shattered remains of defense platforms drifted aimlessly, their jagged edges glowing faintly from the heat of recent destruction. The debris floated like the ghosts of a battle already lost, silent witnesses to the chaos. Captain Mercer stood at the center of the bridge, his face carved with grim determination. The dim lighting of the ship's interior cast shadows across his features, making him look almost statuesque, a man of stone in the face of impending doom. His voice cut through the tense silence like steel. Status report. Lieutenant Jonah Vance, the tactical officer, worked quickly at his station, his fingers dancing across the console. His expression darkened as he read the data. One command dreadnought, 3 destroyers, and at least a dozen smaller vessels, he said, his voice tight. They're in low orbit, sir, heavily entrenched. Their formation is designed to block any approach to the colony. Mercer's eyes narrowed as he processed the information. The Drakari fleet hung in the void like a pack of predators circling their wounded prey. Their ships were monstrous, jagged constructs of blackened metal, each one bristling with weapons that gleamed like the fangs of some ancient beast. The dreadnought at the center of the formation was the largest of them all, its massive silhouette casting a shadow over the burning planet below. It was a ship built for domination, its presence alone enough to inspire fear. The clock was ticking. Mercer could feel it, the weight of every passing second pressing against his chest. Down on the planet, the Lumorans' life support systems were failing. Thousands of lives were hanging by a thread, their survival dependent on the actions he would take in the next few moments. He clenched his jaw, his mind racing. There was no room for hesitation. "Open a channel to the enemy fleet," he ordered, his voice calm but edged with steel. The crew obeyed without question, their movements precise despite the tension that hung thick in the air. A moment later, the connection was established, and Mercer's voice echoed across the void. "This is Captain Elias Mercer of the UHS Horizon's Wrath *," he said, his tone measured and unyielding. "You are trespassing in a protected system and attacking an innocent colony. You have 60 seconds to withdraw your forces or face annihilation." For a moment, there was only silence. Then the screen flickered to life, revealing the face of the Drakari commander. Warlord Zareth was a towering figure, his scarred reptilian features twisted into a mocking grin. His golden eyes burned with malice, and his armor, adorned with trophies from countless conquests, glinted menacingly in the dim light of his warship. When he spoke, his voice was a low, guttural growl dripping with contempt. "One ship." Zareth scoffed, his laughter echoing like thunder. "You bring one ship against my fleet, you're either brave or foolish, human. Either way, you'll die. And when you do, I'll burn what's left of your precious colony to ash." Mercer didn't flinch. His expression remained cold, his gaze locked on Zareth's sneering face. He let the warlord's words hang in the air for a moment before responding, his voice as sharp and unyielding as a blade. "Time's up." The channel cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in tense silence. The crew exchanged nervous glances, their hands poised over their stations, waiting for the order to strike. Outside the ship, the Drakari fleet began to shift, their vessels adjusting their positions as if sensing the storm that was about to break. The dreadnought's weapons began to glow faintly, the promise of destruction building in their cores. Mercer turned to his crew, his voice calm but commanding. "Battle stations, prepare to engage." The bridge came alive with activity, the hum of the ship systems growing louder as the crew carried out their orders. The Horizon's Wrath moved forward, its sleek form cutting through the darkness like a blade. It was one ship against an armada, but Mercer didn't waver. He had made his choice and there was no turning back. The battle had begun. The void of space erupted into chaos as the Horizon's Wrath surged forward, a lone predator amidst a sea of prey. The ship moved with a deadly grace, its sleek hull reflecting the faint glow of distant stars. The silence of the cosmos was shattered by the roar of its railguns. Each shot a streak of light that tore through the darkness. The projectiles, traveling at unimaginable speeds, slammed into the Drakari ships with devastating precision. Hulls crumpled like paper, explosions blooming in fiery bursts that briefly illuminated the battlefield before fading into the cold nothingness of space. The Drakari fleet, so accustomed to easy victories and helpless victims, faltered. Their ships, jagged and predatory, were built for intimidation and brute force, not for a fight against an opponent that struck with such calculated ferocity. Plasma cannons on the Horizon's Wrath roared to life, unleashing streams of searing energy that melted through enemy armor like wax under a flame. One destroyer after another was reduced to smoldering wreckage, their twisted remains drifting aimlessly among the stars. Inside the Horizon's Wrath the crew worked in unison, their faces set with determination. The air was thick with tension, but there was no hesitation. Orders were given and executed with precision, every move a part of a larger plan. Countermeasures flared to life, intercepting incoming missiles with bursts of light and shrapnel. The Drakari's attempts to retaliate were met with frustration as their weapons systems were systematically neutralized. On the surface of Lumora, the battle was no less intense. The skies above the burning colony were streaked with fire as drop pods descended like falling stars, their impact shaking the ground. Commander Elena Reyes led her team of Marines into the heart of the chaos, their boots crunching against the scorched earth as they moved with purpose. The air was thick with smoke, the acrid scent of destruction mingling with the cries of the wounded and the distant roar of collapsing structures. The Drakari ground forces, brutal and overconfident, were caught off guard by the Marines' precision. Reyes and her team moved like shadows, their non-lethal weapons hissing softly as they incapacitated the marauders with stunning efficiency. Electric charges crackled through the air, dropping the Drakari one by one. The Lumorans, hiding in the depths of their caves, heard the muffled sounds of the battle above. For the first, Mercer, standing tall and unyielding, met Zareth's gaze with calm resolve. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of unshakable conviction. "Because we're not like you," he said simply. Zareth's sneer faltered, confusion flickering across his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. There was nothing he could say to a man who had just proven that strength was not measured by the destruction one could cause, but by the lives one chose to protect. Below, the Lumorans emerged cautiously from their hiding places, their eyes wide with disbelief as they took in the sight of the Marines standing victorious amidst the ruins. The fires still burned and the scars of the battle would remain. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the people of Lumora saw the sky, and it was clear. Hope had returned to the Orion system, carried on the wings of a single ship and the unyielding will of those who refused to surrender to the darkness. The first light of dawn crept over the ruins of Lumora, its golden rays piercing through the lingering smoke that hung heavy in the air. The once vibrant colony was now a broken shell of what it had been. Buildings lay in ruins, their skeletal remains casting long, jagged shadows across the scorched earth. The air was thick with the acrid scent of ash and melted metal, mingling with the faint, metallic tang of blood. Yet, amidst the devastation, there was movement, life stirring where once there had been only fear. The Lumorans emerged hesitantly from their shelters, their eyes wide and cautious as they stepped into the light. They were a fragile, delicate people, their pale skin and slender forms making them seem almost ghostly against the backdrop of destruction. Many clutched one another, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief. But as they looked around, what they saw was not the cold indifference of conquerors, but the steady, purposeful movements of their saviors. Human medics moved among the wounded, their hands gentle but efficient as they tended to injuries. The Lumorans flinched at first, unused to such kindness from outsiders, but the soft voices of the medics soothed their fears. Bandages were wrapped, wounds cleaned, and hope rekindled with every life saved. Nearby, human engineers worked tirelessly, their tools humming softly as they repaired what little could be salvaged of the colony's infrastructure. Broken water lines were patched, power grids stabilized, and makeshift shelters erected for those who had lost everything. The Marines, clad in their imposing armor, moved with surprising care through the ruins. They dismantled unexploded Drakari ordnance with practiced precision, their every movement a delicate dance between danger and duty. The Lumorans watched in awe as these soldiers, so fearsome in appearance, handled the deadly devices with the same care one might show a fragile piece of glass. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the Lumorans began to feel safe. In the heart of the colony, the control tower stood as a grim monument to the battle that had raged only hours before. Its once proud spire was now a twisted wreck, its walls blackened and crumbling. It was here that Saria, the young Lumoran who had risked everything to send out the distress beacon, waited. Her delicate hands clutched the edge of a broken console, her body trembling with a mix of exhaustion and lingering fear. She had not dared to hope when she sent the signal, and now, standing amidst the ruins, she hardly knew what to feel. Captain Mercer found her there, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the broken room. His uniform was scorched and torn in places, a testament to the battle he had fought, but his presence was steady and unwavering. He approached her slowly, his boots crunching softly against the debris-strewn floor. For a moment neither spoke, the silence between them filled only by the distant sounds of rebuilding. Finally Saria found her voice, though it trembled as she spoke. "Why did you come?" she asked, her luminous eyes searching his face for answers. "We have nothing to offer, no riches, no power, nothing." Mercer's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. His touch was firm but kind, grounding her in the moment. "Because someone had to," he said simply, his voice low but filled with conviction. "Because no one deserves to be forgotten." Saria's eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. In that moment, the weight of her fear and despair seemed to lift, replaced by something she had thought lost forever, hope. She nodded, unable to speak, and Mercer gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze before stepping back. Outside, the colony began to stir with new life. The Lumorans, inspired by the humans' efforts, began to help where they could. They cleared rubble, carried supplies, and comforted one another. The humans had not only saved their lives, they had given them the strength to rebuild. The sun climbed higher into the sky, its light washing over the battered colony like a promise of better days to come. For the first time since the Drakari had descended upon them, the people of Lumora began to believe that their world could be whole again. And though the scars of the battle would remain, etched into the land and their memories, they knew they would endure. Together they would rebuild not just their homes, but their hope, their courage, and their future. The air above Lumora was no longer heavy with smoke and ash, but alive with the sound of rebuilding. The hum of machinery and the rhythmic clang of tools echoed across the colony as humans and Lumorans worked side by side. Though the scars of battle remained etched into the land, there was a new energy filling the air. A quiet but determined resolve to ensure that such devastation would never happen again. Chief Engineer Cole stood at the edge of the colony, gazing up at the sky where the faint glimmers of orbital satellites began to take shape. His hands were calloused from days of tireless work, but his eyes carried a spark of satisfaction. The orbital defense grid was a marvel of engineering. a network of automated sentinels that would guard Lumora from any future threats. Each satellite, though small, held the power to detect and repel attackers long before they could reach the surface. Cole had overseen every detail of its construction, pouring his expertise and heart into ensuring it would stand as an unbreakable shield for the vulnerable colony below. Nearby, Commander Reyes led a group of Lumoran volunteers through a series of drills. Their movements were clumsy at first, their slender forms unaccustomed to the weight of weapons and armor. But Reyes was patient, her voice firm but encouraging as she guided them. Again, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument, you don't need to be perfect, you just need to be ready. The Lumorans, inspired by her strength and the bravery they had witnessed during the battle, pushed themselves harder with each passing day. Their pale faces, once marked by fear, now carried a quiet determination. They had lived too long in the shadow of helplessness, and they would not return to it. Each step, each swing of a training blade was a promise to themselves and to their saviors. They would never again be defenseless. Among the volunteers was a young Lumoran boy, no older than 14 cycles, his large, luminous eyes filled with a mixture of nervousness and resolve. He stumbled as he tried to lift a training staff, its weight unfamiliar in his hands. Reyes knelt beside him, her voice softening as she adjusted his grip. It's not about strength, she told him, her gaze steady. It's about knowing when to stand your ground and when to move. You'll learn. The boy nodded, his pale cheeks flushing with determination, and tried again. This time his movements were steadier, more confident. Reyes smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth lifting in approval before she moved on to the next trainee. Meanwhile, Captain Mercer stood in the colony's makeshift command center, a small, hastily repaired building that had once been a storage depot. The room was dimly lit, its walls lined with maps and communication terminals. Mercer's voice was calm but firm as he spoke into the holographic communicator before him. The image of a conquered representative flickered in the air, their expression a mix of surprise and respect as they listened. The Orion sector has been left to fend for itself for too long, Mercer said, his tone carrying the weight of his conviction. What happened here on Lumora could happen anywhere. If the conquered truly stands for unity and protection, then prove it. Patrol these systems. Ensure that no other world has to face what these people endured. The representative hesitated for a moment, their gaze dropping as they considered his words. Finally, they looked up, their expressions softening. Your actions here have not gone unnoticed, Captain Mercer. Humanity has shown a strength and compassion that will not be forgotten. The conquered will send patrols to the Orion sector. Lumora will not stand alone. When the transmission ended, Mercer allowed himself a brief moment of relief. He turned to see Saria standing in the doorway, her small frame silhouetted by the light outside. She stepped forward hesitantly, her hands clasped in front of her. You've done so much for us, she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. How can we ever repay you? Mercer shook his head, a faint, weary smile crossing his face. You don't owe us anything, he said simply. Just promise me one thing, stand together, protect each other, that's how you repay us. Saria nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. We will, she whispered, I swear it. Outside, the colony continued to transform. The Lumorans, once scattered and broken, now worked as one. Families rebuilt homes, children laughed as they carried supplies, and elders offered words of wisdom to the younger generation. The humans, though tired from their efforts, stayed to help, their presence a steady reminder that Lumora was no longer alone. As the sun set over the horizon, casting the land in hues of gold and crimson, the first satellite of the orbital defense grid blinked to life. Its faint glow joined the stars above, a silent sentinel watching over the colony below. For the first time in many cycles, the people of Lumora looked to the sky not with fear, but with hope. And though the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, one truth remained unshakable. Lumora was no longer a forgotten world at the edge of the galaxy. It was a beacon of resilience, guarded by the strength of its people and the promise of protection from those who had come to their aid. Together, they would face whatever the future held. Together, they would endure. The detention block was a cold, sterile place, its dim lighting casting long shadows across the metallic walls. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint hum of the energy field that sealed the cells. Inside one of them, Zareth sat on the edge of a narrow bench, his scaled hands resting on his knees. His reptilian features, sharp and angular, were tense with a mixture of defiance and confusion. The faint green glow of the energy barrier illuminated his face, highlighting the golden hue of his eyes as they flicked toward the approaching footsteps. Lieutenant Vance stopped just outside the cell, his expression calm but unreadable. His uniform bore the marks of battle, scorch marks and tears that told the story of the struggle it had taken to bring Zareth and his forces to their knees. Yet there was no arrogance in his posture, no trace of the triumph one might expect from a victor. Instead, there was a quiet resolve, a steady strength that seemed to disarm rather than intimidate. Zareth rose slowly, his tall, sinewy frame casting a shadow against the wall behind him. His movements were deliberate, almost predatory, but his gaze was searching, as if trying to pierce through the layers of mystery that surrounded these humans. "You defeated us," he said at last, his voice low and gravelly, carrying the weight of his pride and the sting of his loss. "You could have killed me. You could have left me to rot in the ruins of my failure. Yet here I stand, alive, fed, unchained. Why?" His words hung in the air, sharp and accusing, but there was a flicker of something else beneath them. Curiosity, perhaps even doubt. Zareth's people, the Drakari, had always equated mercy with weakness. To spare an enemy was to invite betrayal. Yet these humans, so small and fragile in comparison to his kind, had acted in a way that defied everything he had been taught. Lieutenant Vance met Zareth's gaze without flinching. He stepped closer to the energy field, the faint hum growing louder as he lined in. "Because justice isn't about revenge," he said, his voice steady but not unkind. "It's about doing what's right." Zareth's eyes narrowed, his pupils contracting into sharp slits as he studied the man before him. "What is right?" he asked, his tone edged with skepticism. "To spare your enemy so they may rise again. To show kindness to those who would destroy you, that is not strength, that is folly." Vance tilted his head slightly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Is it?" he countered. "Tell me, Zareth, what did your strength bring you? Conquest, fear, and now defeat. You've seen what cruelty leads to. It burns everything in its path until there's nothing left, not even the ones who wield it." Zareth's jaw tightened, his sharp teeth glinting briefly as his lips pulled back in a half-snarl. But the words struck a chord deep within him, a truth he could not entirely deny. He thought of the Drakari warlords, their endless hunger for power, their willingness to sacrifice their own for the sake of domination. He thought of the fear that ruled his people. For a long moment, Zareth said nothing. His golden eyes flicked to the floor, his claws tapping lightly against the metal bench as he wrestled with thoughts he had never allowed himself to entertain. The idea that strength could be found in something other than dominance was foreign to him, yet the humans had proven its truth. They had defeated the Drakari not with brute force alone, but with unity, resilience, and a refusal to abandon their principles, even in the face of hatred. When Zareth finally spoke, his voice was quieter, stripped of its earlier venom. "Your ways are strange to me," he admitted, "but perhaps there is more to them than I understood." Vance's expression softened and he nodded. "Understanding is the first step," he said. "The rest is up to you." As Vance turned to leave, Zareth remained standing, his gaze fixed on the spot where the human had stood. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of his own beliefs begin to shift. The Drakari had always taught that compassion was weakness, but now he wondered if they had been wrong. Perhaps there was a strength in mercy, in kindness, in the willingness to see an enemy as something more than a foe. The hum of the energy field seemed quieter now, less oppressive, as Zareth sat back down on the bench. His claws rested lightly on his knees, and his eyes, once filled with anger and pride, now carried a glimmer of something new: humility. For the first time, he began to question not only the ways of his people, but his own place within them. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the cold walls of his cell, Zareth felt the faint stirrings of change, a lesson in humanity that would linger long after the battle was forgotten. The great plaza of Lumora was bathed in the soft, ethereal glow of the planet's twin moons. The crystalline spires surrounding the square shimmered faintly, their surfaces catching the light and refracting it into delicate rainbows that danced across the gathered crowd. The Lumorans stood in solemn silence, their pale, luminous eyes fixed on the towering figure of Elder Vera as she stepped forward. Her robes, woven from the silken threads of native flora, flowed like liquid starlight around her as she raised her hands, calling for quiet. The air was heavy with emotion, gratitude, sorrow, and a deep, unspoken bond that now connected the Lumorans and their human saviors. Elder Vera's voice, rich and resonant, carried effortlessly across the crowd, amplified by the natural acoustics of the crystalline structures. It was a voice that seemed to touch not just the ears but the hearts of all who heard it. "You have given us more than our lives," she began, her tone steady but filled with emotion. "You have given us hope." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment the only sound was the soft rustling of the wind as it moved through the crowd. The Lumorans, their delicate features illuminated by the moonlight, stood shoulder to shoulder, their expressions a mixture of awe and determination. Many clutched small tokens, pieces of the ruins they had rebuilt, fragments of the past they were learning to leave behind. Vera's gaze swept across them, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We were a people lost," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "For so long we believed that we were forgotten, that the galaxy had turned its back on us. But you reminded us that even in our darkest hour there is light. You reminded us that kindness is not a weakness but a strength, and we will honor your example." She paused, her hands lowering to her sides as she took a step closer to the humans who stood at the forefront of the crowd. Her gaze lingered on Captain Mercer, whose weathered face bore the weight of every decision he had made to bring them to this moment. "We will pass your kindness forward," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "Your courage, your sacrifice, your compassion, they will not be forgotten. They will live on in us and in the generations to come." The crowd erupted into a low, harmonious hum, a sound unique to the Lumorans that resonated deep within the chest, like the vibration of a distant star. It was their way of expressing unity, gratitude, and reverence. The humans stood quietly, their expressions a mixture of humility and pride as they listened to the hauntingly beautiful sound. Mercer stepped forward then, his boots crunching softly against the polished stone of the plaza. His presence commanded attention not through force, but through the quiet strength that radiated from him. He looked out at the sea of faces, Lumoran and human alike, and for a moment he simply stood there as if searching for the right words. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but there was a rawness to it, an honesty that cut through the night like a blade. "You are not alone," he said, his words simple but carrying the weight of a vow. "Humanity will always answer the call." He paused, his gaze locking with Elder Vera's. "We may come from different worlds, different stars, but tonight we stand as one. And no matter where the winds of fate take us, know this, we will always stand with you. That is our promise." The Lumorans bowed their heads, their glowing eyes shimmering with tears. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped, as if the universe was holding its breath, bearing witness to the bond that had been forged in fire and blood, but tempered by compassion and hope. Then the moment broke. The crowd began to disperse, though many lingered, their gazes fixed on the massive silhouette of the Asterisk Horizon's Wrath Asterisk, its hull gleaming faintly under the light of the moons. The ship stood like a guardian over the colony, a symbol of the humanity that had come to their aid when all seemed lost. Inside the ship, the crew prepared for departure. The hum of the engines grew louder, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Mercer stood at the base of the boarding ramp, his hand resting lightly on the railing as he took one last look at the colony. Reyes stood beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd, while Cole adjusted the straps of his gear, his expression unreadable. Elder Vera approached them, her steps slow and deliberate. She reached out, her slender hand resting lightly on Mercer's arm. "Safe travels, Captain," she said softly. "May the stars guide you, and may you find peace in the knowledge that you have changed us for the better." Mercer nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. "And you've changed us too," he replied, "more than you know." With that, he turned and ascended the ramp, his boots echoing against the metal. The crew followed, their faces solemn but resolute. As the ramp closed behind them, the ship's engines roared to life, filling the air with a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to shake the very ground. The horizon's wrath began to rise, its massive form lifting gracefully into the air. The Lumorans watched in silence, their faces turned upward as the ship climbed higher and higher, its lights blinking like distant stars. And then, with a sudden burst of energy, it vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind only the faint shimmer of its passage. For a long moment, the plaza was silent, the crowd staring at the empty sky where the ship had been. Then slowly, the Lumorans began to disperse, their steps lighter, their hearts fuller. They carried with them the memory of what had transpired, the courage of their saviors, the bonds they had forged, and the promise that they were no longer alone. And so, the story of the asterisk Horizon's wrath and its crew began to spread, carried on the winds of the galaxy like a whispered legend. It was a story of courage, of compassion, and of the unyielding determination to protect the innocent. A story that would echo across the stars for generations to come.